I would say it's so nice to see all of you, except I can't see all of you, but it's so nice to be with all of you. It's not the same as being with you in person, but we'll gladly take this. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. It's a thrill to be in your company this evening. And we're thrilled to tell you about the year that's coming up for Court Theater. Court likes a good challenge, and so I think the universe threw us a pandemic, which seems to impact performing arts organizations as much as or more than any other kinds of entities in the world. At first, we thought that this pandemic would change our lives for a couple of weeks, and then we thought a couple of months, and now we realize it's at least a year. And Court could have done, I think, one of a couple of things. One would have been to just cancel the year, which would have meant furloughing staff, and just going dark for a very long time. But we decided that we didn't want to do that, but instead wanted to take advantage of this time to do the things that we've been wanting to do but haven't had time to do. And so this year thrillingly represents some of the things that we wanted to do. As Charlie and the staff began to think about what we wanted to do this year, we decided early on that we wanted to do the things that were most recognizably Court's brand, and lean into who we are, but also to do things that I said we've always wanted to do and that we know would serve us in the future. And so the things you'll hear about tonight are things that we're especially excited to do because we can imagine a future for them at Court Theater. So I know we're all thrilled to share with you information about the things that we'll be doing this year. While we've been dealing with the pandemic, it's also become even clearer to us that the work that we've been doing in being a more equitable theater, that we needed to think even more carefully and maybe move even more quickly on those things. And so, because it's not business as usual, I'm really happy that the entire staff is engaged in some really important discussions about how we become even better citizens of the South Side. While we're doing this work that you'll hear about tonight, we continue our community engagement work. So we'll still be working in Chicago Public Schools. We're doing a new program, Artists and Elders, in which we'll put artists, we'll pair artists with elders who have been isolated for the past 4 months for conversations and eventually to create a piece of work. The artists will create a piece of work for the elders. And so in addition to the work that we do as artists and for the public, we'll continue to do the community engagement work that we've always done. So once again, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to pass the baton to my partner in crime, to Charlie Newell, who is the Marilyn F. Vitale Artistic Director of Court Theater, and he'll walk you through some of the events we have planned for this fall and early winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm thrilled to be on this webinar. It's the first time I've sat as a panelist on a webinar, and it seems appropriate that I'm sitting in the space of my father-in-law, Michael Collins, with pictures of stars and because this feels very otherworldly to be present with hundreds of you on this call. Welcome, welcome. I'm thrilled to be here to share with you some pretty exciting news. My first job tonight is to introduce our panelists, which I will do in a moment, but I thought I would just give a little context for how we got to where we are. The March 12th will be a day in Court Theater history that I certainly will never forget, because it's a day that we were ready to welcome an audience to our theater for a first public preview performance of Lady from the Sea. And yet we had to then tell all those extraordinary artists and staff and production teams that worked so hard to prepare that production that no, we could not. We had to shut down the production. March 12th feels like such a long time ago because so much has happened since. but I guess I wanted to give you that context of the arc of our work since March 12th. On July 14th, we put out a press release, which I wanted to just quote a little bit from because I think it says it best. We've reimagined our 2021 season programming in an effort to remain responsive to the coronavirus pandemic and the ongoing struggles for social and racial justice, two global issues that necessitate revolutionary approaches as we work to envision a safer, more equitable, and more just world for all. Our revised season breaks the mold in so many ways of past seasons and provides unparalleled depth and access in the absence of that vital necessity of being able to be physically together and gather in our theater. We hope the stories we've chosen and share with you tonight will offer the spiritual sustenance that so many of us are seeking in this unprecedented time. Once we knew that we could not continue as we planned, with the extraordinary leadership of Angel, who's provided extraordinary leadership throughout this most challenging period, we organized the staff around a group of task groups to think about creatively ways of how we might proceed. And our thinking was defined by the core values of innovation, creativity, lifelong learning, equity for all, and a genuine commitment to collaboration. We also felt like this challenge, as Angel described it, and in so many ways, the challenges we're all facing, we also thought this could be an opportunity for court. And how might we not just respond in the immediate short term to the necessity and the complication and what can seem like restrictions, how might we actually choose work that not only responds to the current moment, but also lays the foundation for the work that we must continue on beyond this moment. So the primary things you're going to hear about tonight is what we're calling our theater and thought. And that's essentially a group of courses, or seminars that will be virtual, online only throughout the fall. And we'll hear more about those tonight. We'll also hear more about what our plans are once the new year of 2021 arrives. How might we actually return to our theater with safety and care for everyone in that building and produce work that is responsive to the moment? There are other things. Angel mentioned artists and elders. There are other plans and other ideas we're hoping to be able to reveal and share with you in the near future. I hope all of you have had a chance to see our first artistic expression, which is our liminal space, which you can find the link online to see the empty court theater space exactly as it was on March 12th when we had to suspend Lady from the Sea. I want to say just a brief word about the theater and thought before I then introduce the panelists. We thought we must do something that is safe and digital. And how might we create a diverse selection of classic texts? And how might some of them might even allow us to have a one-time online reading of those texts done by professional actors? As Angel mentioned, this endeavor to create the Theater and Thought seminars is really an opportunity for us to most powerfully leverage what we think of as such a part of our identity, and some would even say our competitive advantage. And that is the singular, unique opportunity that we, a professional theater in residence at the University of Chicago, have to create genuine collaboration in the making of art and the making of knowledge and scholarship. So you'll hear about some of those ambitions tonight. I should say, because it's necessary and being realistic, everything you hear tonight comes out of also a core value of an eternal optimism about we must lean forward into the challenge and into the future, even when, or maybe especially when, it is most uncomfortable. This is a spirit that's driving all of this, even as, of course, we're going to be making decisions on a day-by-day basis based on the conditions on the ground of what is and maybe what is not possible to do based on the planning that we put in place. So I say all of that as a caveat, but out of a place of eternal optimism. Tom Stoppard has been for Court Theater a real touchstone, and we are recognized as one of the premier interpreters of his work, not just in Chicago, but around the country. And because of that relationship, we were able to create something that, frankly, no other theater that I know is able to do. Tom wrote this, Sir Tom, I should call him. Sir Tom wrote this play. It opened in London of this year in January. And they, of course, like every other theater, had to shut it down. There is hope, of course, that it will be revived in London and then have a future life in New York, and perhaps we'll be able to do it here in Chicago. But because of our pre-existing relationship with Sir Tom, and through a personal request that I made to him, because of his response and understanding of how wonderful our production was of the hard problem, due to the fact of the collaboration with the faculty here at the University of Chicago, he advocated for us to get permission to do a one-time only reading of his newest play in October of this fall. As part of that, we're calling this the deep dive, where the Leopoldstadt text will have 6 or 8 seminar online discussions as preparation for then hearing an online reading of the newest Tom Stoppard play by professional actors. So we are getting access to something that is truly unique to us, the University of Chicago, and bless you, thank you, Sir Tom. Now to Nora's comments. I'm just going to read her words. Here we go. Notes for Charlie on Leopoldstadt. Leopoldstadt marks a milestone in Stoppard's life as a playwright. As many of you may know, Tom Stoppard only discovered his Jewish parentage in the mid-1990s when he was a man of middle age. At age 57, the playwright learned his birth name was Thomas Straussler, and that he had started life as a child refugee of war. Born to Czechoslovakian Jewish parents in 1937, Stoppard discovered he lost his home and his family at age 2 when the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia in 1939. Stoppard is now 83 years old. The play is his first piece of dramatic writing to explore his newfound Jewish identity and to reckon with the loss of both his mother's and father's families in the Holocaust. Court's online production of this play in October will coincide with the publication of a new biography of Tom Stoppard, in which the lost story of his early life will finally be told. This play is a very semi-autobiographical work. I guess you can't be very and semi, but I'll stick with it. The play traces 3 generations of an assimilated Jewish family in Vienna from 1900 to 1955. While engaging themes of war, trauma, and memory, the play's narrative examines the flourishing of Viennese art and culture in the first half of the 20th century. It also documents the changing social and legal status of Jewish citizens in Austria between 1900 and 1955. It celebrates the work of Jewish painters, composers, and intellectuals in those years, and it tracks the dispossession of artifacts and artworks belonging to Austrian Jewish families in the Holocaust. Above all, however, the play depicts in vivid detail how children experience the violence and upheaval of wartime. Every time we create a play at Court, we invite faculty at the University of Chicago to join us in the work of investigating and understanding this play. As a prelude to our reading Leopoldstadt, we invite you, our audience, to step behind the scenes with us for these crucial creative meetings with scholars. With the help of David Levine, who's joined us tonight, a deep friend and advocate for Court Theater, we've assembled an extraordinary team of University of Chicago faculty who will lead us into the world of the play and illuminate the social, cultural, and political landscape of Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Here are some of the people you'll be hearing from. Leora Auslander, professor of European social history. She's an expert on 20th century material culture and the Jewish diaspora. Dean John Boyer, dean of the college at the University of Chicago and a distinguished historian of Austria and the Habsburg Empire. Christine Merriling, professor of art history. She will be discussing the Austrian painter Gustav Klimt. A painting by Klimt is a recurring motif throughout the play. And Tara Zara, MacArthur Award winner and history of professor who studies the Kindertransport and whose scholarship focuses on children's experiences of war, genocide, and displacement. This is a new way for us to bring to Chicago the Chicago premiere of a new play by Tom Stoppard. We hope you will join us for this unforgettable experience. Thank you, Nora, so much for your writing. I hope I did it justice.
For the Theater Thought series, I mean, I have to say, and it could be that I'm just outing myself as an unrepentant geek, but the thought of Court Theater productions being in dialogue with some of the most interesting colleagues that we have on campus, and it's a campus with a lot of interesting colleagues, strikes me as a super exciting event. So, what we essentially have is really great artists and really interesting scholars thinking together about a series of really exciting pieces. So you'll be able to see, if you go check out the Court website, the lineup and some further details. I just wanted to alert you to these courses that are being offered in collaboration between the Graham School, which is the University of Chicago's, I don't know what we would call it, sort of outreach program, which is to say you don't have to pay, $60,000 to join the University of Chicago's regular campus. You can take courses through the Graham School at really reasonable rates. And in fact, for Court subscribers, it'll be possible to be doing this kind of deep dive as part of their subscriptions for the season. So first off will be an event on the world of August Wilson and the Black creative voice, which will include two of my very distinguished colleagues in the English department, Ken Warren and Adrian Brown. Ken Warren, as you know, a scholar of 19th and 20th century African-American fiction, as well as Adrian Brown, who is a professor of contemporary literature and contemporary African-American culture. The thought that they would then be in dialogue with Ron's work on the forgive me as I try not to rustle papers in the foreground. Forgive me about this. Ron's work on August Wilson strikes me as a super exciting opportunity. That is to hear both Ken Warren and Adrian in dialogue with one another and in dialogue with August Wilson's work, and then in conversation with Ron O.J. Parson. That will be taking place in September for four consecutive weekly sessions. That'll be then followed by my colleague Sarah Nutter in the Classics Department and in Theater and Performance Studies, who will be leading a discussion of Euripides' the Bacchae and contemporary adaptations, which is something that she's written a book on. It's an extraordinarily interesting book on the contemporary resonance of Attic tragedy. So this will be right in her wheelhouse. The reading of the Bacchae that Court Theatre will then be presenting will be prepared by Monty Cole, who is, as I'm sure many of you know, a really promising and exciting artist who is new to the Court Theatre family and and whose work I think will have great resonance with Court Theatre audiences. The conversation between Sarah's work, which is on the contemporary resonance of Euripides, and Monty's work, which basically stages the contemporary resonance of Euripides, I think will be a really exciting one. That'll be then followed by a series of 4 weekends on Carol Churchill's Fen and the dramaturgical process. In this case, Vanessa Stalling, known to Court Theatre audiences and Chicago audiences for her many years, although she's just a young woman, but her many years of distinguished and acclaimed work, Jeff Award-winning work here in Chicago, will be in dialogue with Derek Mattson, who is an instructor of dramaturgy who teaches in theater and performance studies here at the University of Chicago, but he's also an acclaimed dramaturg around Chicago and indeed around the country, working in opera and theater. He's a scholar and a practitioner, and I'm really excited to and looking forward to the conversation between Vanessa and Derek about the mechanics of dramaturgy, but also the practices of dramaturgy. How do a dramaturg and a director think together about a piece like Carol Churchill's Fen? And then lastly, but certainly not least, will be an, I think, extremely interesting collaboration between my colleague Tina Post in Theater and Performance Studies, Gabby Randall Bent, whom Charlie extolled as a Court Theatre Fellow. She's completing a PhD at Northwestern University and is an acclaimed scholar and an equally acclaimed theater artist. And they will be thinking together about Lorraine Hansberry's Les Blancs and its relationship to racial injustice. Look, I could go on all night giving you the credentials of my colleagues and telling you how exciting they are. I hope I've given you a brief overview, despite the rustling papers, for which many apologies, but a brief overview of this model dialogue that I think Court Theatre has been convening for years, but in its genius is convening in a virtual space, namely between some of the most exciting thinkers about theater and some of the most exciting practitioners in the theater. I know I speak for my colleagues when I say how excited we are to be part of that conversation.
It's now my pleasure to segue us from the Theater and Thought seminar work into what productions are we looking to do at Court Theatre starting in the spring of 2021. All of our work and all of our planning, of course, we are being diligently and excruciatingly detailed responsive to the COVID-19 situation and how cautiously optimistic we are proceeding with the idea of could we actually perform work in Court Theatre. The assumptions that we're operating under is that we, of course, will follow all Illinois and Chicago and University of Chicago guidelines about such safety and such protocols. And what we're imagining and hoping is that it will be possible for all of the artists, all of the production staff that we need, and 50 members of the audience to be sitting in properly spaced seats in our 250-seat theater so they could watch a live performance of either Titanic or Othello or Two Trains Running. Now, we expect that we will then we hope that we will be able to make available to a larger digital viewership access to that performance that's happening in Court Theatre from their home. So it's this hybrid version of live in court theater and live at home for you. How do we, and the challenge from an artistic point of view, of course, is these are two very different ways of experiencing a work of art. So how do we create an equally powerful experience with two such different ways of it of an audience? You'll hear tonight a little bit about that. Particularly, I'm going to now introduce Vanessa Stalling to talk more about this a project on Titanic. But again, because of the unique opportunity that Court Theater has to partner with experts in so many different fields, needless to say, the medical experts have been invaluable to us throughout this process. But we've also been collaborating and talking with other experts at the university in new technologies and new ways of thinking about how to share information virtually, or even new ways to use old technology. It reminds me of the Jacobean play, a new way to pay old debts, a new way to create new things from old technology. Because if we, the last thing in the world that we ever want to do is then have this experience that we had with Lady from the Sea, namely, we think we're going to be able to do something and then we have to cancel it entirely. So believe it or not, one of the things we're experimenting and looking into is how might, for example, if it turns out we can't have 50 people in the audience to see Othello, how might that be a fulfilling experience for us to stream it only virtually to people at home? So again, with the design and casting and conception of these productions is operating on multiple levels. I find this incredibly stimulating, challenging. I love change. I love new challenges. And each of these productions is seeking to not just look at this as a challenge, but look at this as an opportunity. So let me now please introduce Vanessa Stalling. You've heard me speak about her already, but she's going to speak to us more. And Vanessa, particularly, I'm sure you're going to talk about what is actually the source text of the play that we are producing, because this is verbatim documentation and witnessing about events that surrounded the infamous sinking of the Titanic. The title of the play is called Titanic: Scenes from the British Commission's Inquiry of 1912. Please welcome Vanessa.
Great, thanks so much, Charlie. And it's really great to be here. So Owen McCafferty's Titanic, it's a collage of the verbatim questions and testimonies from the 1912 Titanic inquiry that happened in response to the disaster. And it retells the survivor stories using dialogue taken from the word-for-word accounts. And the back and forth exchange between the counsel conducting the inquiry and the survivors providing testimony generates this tension that really resonated for me right now in particular. And it's a tension that comes from this desire to reveal the truth that wants to remain covered. And what gets exposed in this process is a society's value systems and those who have the power to create those value systems. And essentially it's because there will always be icebergs. There will always be icebergs, and they represent to me the dangers that are known. And these dangers are so often accompanied by numerous advance warnings. And it's because that these dangers are known that a society's value is revealed in how we prepare for that inevitable hit of an iceberg and what we do in response to that collision. Also, the nature of the inquiry, it's expressed through docudrama, and it inspired me to think about exciting ways that really lends itself to experimentation with our new modes for experiencing theater. And in particular, I'm interested in revealing to an audience the technologies involved in producing a podcast-like experience. And I'm not interested in doing a period piece drama. It's actually the opposite of that. I think about using the text as a vehicle for an ensemble of actors in our current times, dressed in contemporary clothing, doing the activity, which is the creation of this experience that will lift an audience's imagination through the text. And in that way in particular, to me, it's a real celebration of what actors do, that actors transport audience through their words. It is them telling the story. And it also lends itself to be a real celebration of designers. And in particular, I think about sound design and the capacity for sound to conjure different worlds and to take us to places of memory and to create atmospheres. And if it's safe to do so, as Charlie has been speaking about, I am excited to try to experiment with a hybrid production that would engage a small audience that's able to watch an ensemble creating this podcast live, as well as an at-home audience that's watching it through their laptops. But both the in-person audience and at home are experiencing it through headphones. And that really, to provide for that really intimate experience that is about the storytelling of someone so close to you through headsets. And thanks again very much for your interest in the show and for being here tonight. And now I'd like to introduce Associate Director of Othello, Gabrielle Randall Bent. Over to you, Gabby.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. So excited about Titanic and all of the different ways that we're going to learn about not just our medium, but our moment. I'm here to talk a little bit about Othello. It's really hard to not say Oedipus after saying that for a year, but I'm here to talk about Othello in my capacity as the associate director. Charlie and I have been working for the last few months thinking through not just what it means to choose to do this play, but increasingly every week as we check in, what it means to do this play in the world as it's progressing. Something that is not just, or not even especially a contemporary take, but is a thoughtful reflection of what it means to have arrived at a moment, and knowing that every journey that ends has a beginning. And so a lot of what we're doing with Othello is thinking about what it means to recognize it as a beginning, as a place, a foundational text that we know was never, ever, ever, ever about the story of a Black man and his descent into madness. It was always a story about race and racism and systemic racism and how it's created and propagated by a society, from myths of lasciviousness and jealousness and brutishness of Black men to the folly of white women, to ultimately the naivete of believing that one racist man, one racist ensign is a bad apple, and if you get rid of him, then you have a chance of fixing the whole bunch. What does it mean to think through this production not as a classic in the way that maybe we've all become comfortable thinking about classics as something that has to be taken up because it's a part of our history and it's something that's beautiful and it's something that has earned a place. But Charlie has really steered this ship as in a really powerful, I might even say momentous way, to think through what a classic is in this moment as a monument, as something that may or may not need to stand, but definitely has to be dismantled in order to understand how it got up there and if it holds the power that we always assumed that it holds. And so led by the wonderful Keldon Roston Jr. and Tim Kaine, we are so excited to take up this play, not just as a not just for our audiences in a present place, but also in a digital space where we can actually think through the technologies of Othello, to think through the technologies of what it means to have an avatar, to have a body stand in for ourselves, and the journey that we all take with our own Iagos and our own desperate belief that even if our life starts out with the levity that Othello starts out with in Act 1, Scene 1, that we can all avoid the downfall of the last image of bodies on a bed. And instead of putting Othello in our place, the goal through not just the medium of theater, but the technologies of the world and the challenges and opportunities that it presents, are an opportunity for us to give our audiences a place to put themselves where Othello stands, and see if we come out a little bit smarter, a little bit more empathetic, and a little bit more willing to take on systems and take them down. I now have the pleasure of introducing the incomparable resident artist, Ron O.J. Parson, who's going to talk about the last production of the season, Two Trains Running.
Hey, Charlie, everybody. I appreciate you inviting me and being able to talk about the upcoming season. Now, granted, first of all, I want to say, is everybody healthy and staying safe and social distancing? Please do, because it's very important. We have leveled the curve a little bit, and let's take it down. But, I did want to talk a little bit about, the discussion that we are going to have before I talk about what we're going to do Two Trains later in spring, because it's such an honor to work with Ken Warren and in that element early on. And also, I understand there's a young man named Joel Rohn who has been doing some work with August Wilson. And of course, I love to talk about August. I mean, talk about August's a commitment to the Black arts movement. And when, of course, I came up in the 60s. So being able to talk about those things before we do the play is something that has come out of the pandemic. Perhaps we wouldn't have even been able to do that. But since we are going to do that, I'm really looking forward to that honor before we get into doing the play. Now, as far as Two Trains Running, of course, in the century cycle, it's the one that takes place in the 60s. I believe it was the 5th or 6th play that he wrote in the cycle, maybe the 7th, but I think early on. But it's ironic that it's happening and we're doing it at a time now with such a civil unrest and upheaval that is happening. Of course, all of August Wilson's plays are relevant to anything that's going on because they're covering every century of the African-American experience here in America. So in particular, the 60s, because that was kind of a revolution, a moment that happened in our culture. With Two Trains Running, of course, it will be my 31st August Wilson production, which every time I look at those numbers, I'm like, wow, I'm getting old. But being able to come back to August Wilson at any time is truly an honor. I know people always say, well, are you tired of doing August Wilson? I say, well, do you get tired of doing Shakespeare? Do you get tired of doing Tennessee Williams or Eugene O'Neill or Arthur Miller? No, you don't. You never do. And I appreciate always coming back to August Wilson. With Two Trains Running, as I said, it takes place in the 60s. And of course, in the Hill District in Pittsburgh, which a lot of August Wilson's plays took place, in the 50s and the 40s and 50s and 60s, it was a very vibrant neighborhood in Pittsburgh, the Hill District. It had a heavy German and Jewish content, but then as the Black migration came up from the South, it changed, the makeup changed, but it was still a very affluent neighborhood area in Pittsburgh until the 60s with what they call urban renewal, because when urban renewal happened, a lot of people were moved out, businesses were shut down. And so this is Two Trains Running is taking place in a area now that is going through urban renewal. So there's a lot of upheaval. And, of course, with August Wilson and his classic look at character in this particular play, of course, I'm going to have a few of my quote unquote regular Wilsonites, I call them, A.C. Smith, Alfred Wilson, Gerard Haynes, who did Gem of the Ocean, if anybody has seen that, in Seven Guitars. And we're introducing some new people to the mix as well. Ron Connor, who's worked with me a lot. But I do believe that hopefully by the spring, we'll be able to have more than 50 people, but we never know what we're going to do. So we'll be able to adapt as, of course, University of Chicago, we're able to adapt to any situation. And in particular, this pandemic, we've done I think, a great job of trying to adapt to a situation. And actually, it's bringing out more things. It's bringing out more research. It's bringing out more things that we might not have done if we didn't have to be Zooming. I'm a Zoom expert now. I've never even thought I knew what Zoom was before. I just thought it was a legal thing that you see on the commercials. Anyway, enough said. I just feel like great to be able to, we all want to get back on stage, and whatever that way, if it's virtual, okay, if it's on stage, that's great too. But I just want to thank everybody for still looking in and supporting us, and I look forward to getting back on stage. And now I'd like to turn it over to the illustrious Chip Bamberger.
Hi. Hi, thank you, Ron. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. As you've just heard, rather than postpone the season, CORT, led by Charlie and his collaborators, has instead chosen to expand CORT's offerings, taking advantage of CORT's relationship with the University of Chicago and scholars here. CORT is expanding what a theater can be and what a theater can do. This is the most ambitious season CORT has ever done, and it's going to be different from anything any of us have seen. As many of you know, CORT depends on its patrons to fund its work on the stage, in the classroom, and out in the community. We're truly grateful for everyone's support. Thank you for donating tickets to canceled shows. Thank you for subscribing to the season without knowing what exactly you were subscribing to. And thank you for gifts of all sizes. Your funding has allowed CORT to take bold, creative risks this year. I'm confident that innovative artistic rewards will be the result of taking those risks. Thank you, my fellow trustees, members of the Director Circle, Producer Circle, donors, subscribers, the community and campus partners, artists, faculty, staff, students, and patrons for joining us this evening. I look forward to seeing you virtually at first, hopefully someday soon in person at CORT Productions in the future. I'm going to hand it back now to Charlie for Q&A. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, Chip, and everyone. We're now going to open it up things for all of you to ask questions from the Q&A portion of tonight's event. So if you like to ask a question, and a number of you already have, please, as I said, use the Q&A button on the lower right and type in your question and submit it. We won't be able to answer all the questions, but we'll do our best to answer as many as possible as we possibly can. I'm going to start us off actually by bringing Ron back into the conversation. Ron, I was so struck by what you said about how because of the current situation and how it's in your creative process, it's bringing more things and more thinking to August Wilson. I mean, you are known for understanding and revealing things about August Wilson that nobody thought were there and are clearly a leading interpreter of his work. I'm just thrilled to hear you talk about how much the challenge is creating more thoughts for you. Can you share some of them with us? Yeah.
Well, I sure can. I always think that as artists, we always have to be influenced by our surroundings and what's happening to us in the world. And I think with August's work, that's always something that comes into the room because it's a very spiritual experience in that rehearsal. So, and I always go back to the story that Alfred Wilson and I talk about when we met August at the Goodman. Alfred was working there. And we talked to him about his plays and how he developed them. And he always says it was a spiritual thing, that the voices were coming to him and he was writing them down. Sometimes he didn't know what the play was going to be about, where it was going to go. And I think that's the same thing here. When we get in rehearsal, especially if we're still in the pandemic and we're still, fighting social distancing and things like that, there's no way that will feed into what we're doing. I give that example of Waiting for Godot because that was happening at a time when Ferguson was happening, and we could not do that play without thinking about those people who were dealing with that civil unrest.
Yeah.
And so with the civil unrest that's happening now, especially in the theater and in neighborhoods, this stuff that's happening in Two Trains Running with that neighborhood, a thriving diner restaurant that is now getting 2-3 people a day, and he's struggling, which some of the restaurant business is struggling now for different reasons sometimes, but it's the same kind of thing where they have to band together and try to, and there's also the thing about there's two sides of every issue, of every fight. Sometimes generations have a different approach to the same civil unrest. Some of the young people want to do it one way, and the older people are like, look, we've been there. You got to take the baton and pass it forward. Don't go back to the beginning of the race. You know what I mean? So that's what we look at, and that's what we'll look at, of course, with these actors that have worked with me in tons of productions. They know me, and they know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
Thank you so much, Ron. I want to bring another question that was offered from our audience tonight. My friend Joan has asked the question of, we're facing as artists a lot of what teachers are facing, right? How do you manage the best of both worlds in staging something for both live audience and virtual streaming audience? What are the challenges in making it work for both rather than optimizing one for the other? I'm wondering if, Vanessa, if you want to speak to that about Titanic, because certainly one of the things to say about Titanic is it's the most aggressively safe social distance production that we're imagining. And yet, how do we achieve this best of both possible worlds? And Vanessa, if you want me to try to respond to the question instead, I'm happy to do that. But I thought we'd send it to you.
Sure, yeah, I'll start, and then feel free to jump in anytime, Charlie. And essentially, what this moment has done for me, I really appreciate what you're saying, Ron, about this opportunity to have time with theater in a way we haven't had before, in terms of being able to explore it, whether in these seminars or really be able to think about what is it that we value in theater, and what is it that theater does. And for me, it was going back and thinking about how really it's about actors being on a stage and conjuring our imagination. And so we can do that through a digital landscape as well as in person. And so really, to me, it's thinking about how can I leverage that the most, which is about the actors and their storytelling and how they are creating a shared experience for an audience through their words and through taking us there. So that's the focus that I'll be thinking about.
Thank you, Vanessa. Anel, I wanted to just share this question that gentleman offered. Maybe you can see it. I'm an alumnus for the college and grad school from the 1970s and applaud the self-consciousness shown in engaging the Southside community and presenting August Wilson on Othello. What specific efforts will Court and University of Chicago make to reach out to make these projects widely marketed and accessible to members of the Southside community?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, only because the answer has many, many prongs. And as we think about the South Side, we've been thinking about South Side residents certainly as audience members or potential audience members, but we've been expanding that over the past few years to think about the artists that we serve. If we had been able to enact last season in the way it had been designed, 65% of the audiences, of the actors at court would have been artists of color. And as we continue to think more deeply about that work, we think not only about actors, but we think about directors, about playwrights, about designers. So how does court become a place that provides jobs for and is populated by residents of the South Side? How is the theater, how do Southsiders in every facet live as total stakeholders of the theater? Alongside that is the way in which we engage folks in creating work. As Charlie built the Oedipus trilogy, he actually began with a conversation about Gospel of Colonus. And it was through conversations with Southsiders that we decided to not just do Gospel of Colonus, but really to do the Oedipus trilogy. It was astounding to see the impact of those conversations on Oedipus Rex. And as we move forward, we know that those conversations will take place more and more. The Artists and Elders project that I mentioned, I know one of the things that we're thrilled about is that those elders will become part of that family of the people that we talk with as we think about what projects we might do. So we're really thinking about Southsiders in every aspect of the theater, from audiences to actors to other artists, but also to advisors, so that the theater belongs to them in the way that the theater belongs to our board of directors or to people at the university. So it's a lot. And we're thinking really carefully about the ways in which we engage all aspects of the South Side. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Angel. Dave, there's a question that I'm fascinated to hear your response. In your sense of the world of the scholar and intellectual at the University of Chicago, why are scholars so often seeking out these kinds of collaborations with artists? What is there's any, I know this is a very broad question, but if there's something that you have learned is of a particular, it's been to the extraordinary benefit of court theater, but how much the scholars, when we approach them, the willingness to not just dive in, but to challenge and to provoke us further, is such a gift and is so unique to court theater as a professional theater. Help us understand that culture some more, would you please?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I mean, I'll give it a shot. Look, there's the sort of Rate My Professor's website where, like word gets out, that like some professor is totally asleep at the wheel, just going through the motions. So like, I think if there was a Rate My Theater app, court theater would be way up there, at least for the academics in the world, precisely because of this eagerness to engage. Look, I think I would also say, this is unusual in North America. I can't really speak for Canada, but let's say it's unusual in the United States, because a lot of theaters, I think, would disavow a relationship with professors. It's like, wait, no, like, we want to be sure that we are, that we're popular and we don't want to be too smart or too edgy. But like, I feel like certainly word has gotten out amongst my colleagues that the conversation at court theater is a really unpredictable and generative conversation, and that the theater is really keen to engage scholars, and that they won't be shut down, but in fact are invited to participate. I mean, if you think about the trauma of March 12th, I think about the fact that my students and I were in the theater as that was happening on March 12th. In fact, you guys invited us in as a seminar to like participate in, to observe the rehearsal process, to engage with the artists, to talk to them, talk back with them about the work we were observing. It's a really formative dialogue, and I find it super exciting that Court basically has, you know, the confidence and the open-mindedness to welcome academics who are used to thinking independently into a conversation about your art. And the more we do it, the more people, like, look at this Leopoldstadt cast of characters you've got. Look at these, the cast of academics you have attracted to the series of events that you put together, the Theater Thought series. It's super exciting. So it's like, wow, the artists are amazing, the academics are amazing. Like, this is, and the more you do it, I think the more excitement will grow.
Okay, thank you. I now see a question that I'd like to actually pass on to Gabby, if I may. What source for the Cinthio's original story are you using for the basis of the adaptation of The Moor of Venice? Gabby, you want to take a stab at that? We've talked a little bit about that original source text for Shakespeare. Frankly, our thinking has moved beyond that, but I'm sure we'll come back to it in our process as well.
Yeah, so I think that what is true is that Cinthio's original text was one of many inspirations for Shakespeare as Othello. It's in conversation with much of his earlier writing, and there are also contemporary ethnographic and travelogue tales that are all sort of feeding into the text that we're using. So Cinthio at this point is not a central figure, especially because, and this goes to another question that was a part of the Q&A, because of the blatant sort of morality tale that Cinthio was looking to tell about Desdemona and the unnamed Moor of Venice, that there's actually much more nuance that goes to the thing I said earlier about highlighting the work that Shakespeare was doing to choose to write a play about systemic racism, as racism was becoming something that was associated with phenotype in this moment. And there's a lot less nuance in my understanding. I don't read Middle Italian, Middle Venetian, but in my understanding of the original Cinthio text, there's much less nuance in the relationship between the unnamed Moor and Desdemona.
Great, thank you. I've been reading Toni Morrison's play Desdemona recently, and I'm sure that's going to become part of our process as well as so many other texts. There's so many opportunities and questions that Othello just keeps offering us. It's been extraordinary already. I just want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists and all of the artists and staff who not only were on this call with all of you, but also who helped make it happen. As is always the case, those of you who are seen, those of us who are seen, are merely the tip of the iceberg about an extraordinary cast and staff and artists and university colleagues to make all of what Court Theater does possible. I also have just been reminded by Ron Oj, we're going to do a reading of Toni Morrison's play of Desdemona during the Spotlight reading series, so be sure to look for that. And most especially, I want to thank literally the hundreds of you who joined us tonight to learn more about what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. We thank you so much for your support. We're going to keep leaning forward into the challenge of the moment and do what is so core to our mission in making great art for our community. I wish you all the best of the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and wash your hands.